I never thought a simple dinner could change the course of my life. But that's exactly what happened that fateful night at Le Jardin, the crown jewel of New York's dining scene. As I entered the restaurant, the soft glow of crystal chandeliers washed over me, illuminating the sea of elegantly dressed patrons seated at tables draped in crisp white linen. The air was thick with the aroma of exquisite cuisine and the gentle murmur of sophisticated conversation. My name is Clara, and I should have felt on top of the world. After all, I was dining at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, wearing a dress that cost more than some people's monthly rent. But instead of excitement, a knot of dread tightened in my stomach as I followed the maître d' to our table, where my husband, Leonard, and his mother, Agnes, were already seated. Leonard, with his perfectly coiffed hair and designer suit, looked every inch the successful businessman he presented himself to be. Agnes, draped in pearls and wearing a look of perpetual disapproval, sat beside him like a sentinel guarding a precious treasure. As I took my seat, I could feel her eyes on me, scrutinizing my every move as if waiting for me to make a mistake. "You're late," Leonard said, his voice laced with the sharp edge I had become all too familiar with over the years of our marriage. "We've been waiting for 20 minutes. I'm sorry," I murmured. Agnes snorted disapprovingly. "A lady should always be punctual, Clara. It's a matter of respect." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. It was always like this. Leonard and Agnes united in their criticism of me, while I struggled to keep my head above water in the sea of their expectations. The waiter approached, a beacon of temporary relief. "Good evening," he said, his French accent adding an extra layer of sophistication to the already elegant atmosphere. "May I offer you our wine list?" Leonard waved him off. "No need. We'll have a bottle of Chateau Margaux, 1787. My eyes widened. I knew that wine. It was infamous for its price tag upwards of $50,000 a bottle. "Leonard," I whispered, leaning closer. "Are you sure?" He cut me off with a look that could freeze fire. "I know what I'm doing. Clara, don't embarrass me." The waiter, to his credit, didn't flinch. "Excellent choice, sir." "And for their meals," Leonard ordered, without consulting the menu, a special off-menu dish featuring rare white Alba truffles. Agnes followed suit with something equally extravagant. When it was my turn, I quietly ordered the simplest thing I could find, a Caesar salad. "A salad?" Agnes scoffed. "Really, Clara? You should take advantage of cuisine like this when you have the opportunity. Not that you're watching your figure." Her eyes swept over me, making me feel exposed and inadequate. The evening progressed in a haze of tension. Leonard and Agnes dominated the conversation, discussing their recent trip to Monaco and plans for their upcoming excursion to the Maldives. I sat silently, pushing my salad around my plate and sipping water, feeling more like a spectator than a participant in my own life. When the main course arrived, a dish that looked more like a work of art than food, Leonard turned his attention to me. "So, Clara," he said, his tone deceptively casual, "have you given any more thought to quitting that little job of yours? You know, you don't actually need to work." I tensed. My little job was a position as a financial analyst that I had worked hard to achieve. "I like my job, Leonard. We've talked about this." Agnes chimed in. "A wife's place is in the home, dear. You should be focusing on making Leonard happy, not playing at being a career woman." I felt a familiar surge of frustration. "It's not playing, Agnes. I'm good at what I do, and I enjoy it." Leonard's face darkened. "We'll discuss this later," he said, his tone brooking no argument. The rest of the meal passed in a blur of forced smiles and strained conversation. I was counting down the minutes until we could leave when the waiter approached with the bill. Leonard glanced at it and then, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, handed it to me. "Be a dear and take care of this, won't you?" he said. "You know it's your job to support your husband in everything." I looked at the bill and felt the blood drain from my face. The total was over $50,000 more than most people earn in a decade. I knew we had money, but this was beyond extravagant. It was reckless. "Leonard," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "this is too much. We can't what?" he interrupted, his voice rising. "Can't afford it." He snorted derisively. "Don't be ridiculous, Clara. Everything we have is thanks to my hard work. I surprised myself with the firmness of my voice. No, I said. The silence that followed was deafening. Leonard's face twisted with rage. And before I could react, he grabbed his chair and shoved it back with such force that it toppled over. In one fluid motion, he grabbed his plate and hurled its contents directly at my face. I sat there, stunned, as truffle-infused sauce dripped down my cheeks and chunks of expensive mushrooms clung to my hair. The entire restaurant had gone silent. All eyes on our table. "How dare you defy me?" Leonard snarled. "I'm your husband." As if on cue, Agnes's shrill laughter broke the silence. "I told you." "Leonard," she cackled loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "I told you you should have divorced this shrew. But you never listened to me." I sat there, humiliated and shocked, as other diners began to murmur and point. Some looked away in embarrassment, while others stared openly, forks suspended mid-air. In that moment, I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. But then, something unexpected happened. As I wiped the sauce from my eyes, I caught my reflection in a nearby mirror. Instead of the broken, cowering woman I expected to see, I saw someone with fire in her eyes and steel in her spine. I slowly stood up, my movements deliberate and calm. Leonard and Agnes were still hurling insults, but their words seemed to fade into the background. I was done being their punching bag. I was done being the silent, obedient wife. I was done letting them dictate my worth. As I straightened my back and lifted my chin, I noticed the maître d' approaching, concern etched on his face. "Madam," he said softly, "is everything all right?" I looked at him, then at Leonard and Agnes, who were now watching me with a mixture of rage and confusion. A plan began to form in my mind. A plan that would change everything. "No," I said, my voice steady. "Everything is not all right. But it will be." Leonard and Agnes didn't know it, but their reign of terror was about to come to an end. As I stood there, covered in the remnants of a $50,000 meal, I made a decision. It was time to take back control of my life. And it would start right here, in this restaurant. Tonight, the storm that had been brewing for years was about to break. And nothing would ever be the same. As I stood there, my face dripping with the remnants of Leonard's $50,000 tantrum, I felt a strange calmness wash over me. The shock of the moment had given way to something else, a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. The murmurs of the other diners faded into the background as I gazed steadily at the maître d', a man I knew very well but had pretended not to for far too long. "Jean," I said softly, using his name for the first time in public. "Could you bring me a towel?" A flicker of understanding passed between us as Jean quickly walked away. I turned back to face Leonard and Agnes, who were staring at me with a mixture of anger and confusion. They were clearly expecting me to crumble, to beg for forgiveness, or to slink away. But I was done playing by their rules. "What do you think you're doing?" Leonard sputtered, his face red with rage. "Sit down and stop making a scene." I almost laughed at the irony. Me, making a scene? That's rich. Coming from the man who just threw a plate of food at his wife. Agnes gasped dramatically. "How dare you speak to your husband that way? After all he's done for you." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. And what, exactly, has he done for me? Agnes belittled me, controlled me, spent my money like it was water. Leonard's eyes widened at that last part. "Your money? Don't be ridiculous. Clara, everything we have is thanks to my hard work." At that moment, Jean returned with a warm, damp towel. As I began to wipe my face, I noticed other staff members discreetly gathering nearby, observing the scene with knowing glances. The time had come to let the cat out of the bag. "Leonard, Agnes," I said, my voice firm and clear, "there's something I need to tell you about this restaurant." Leonard scoffed. What? You've been secretly meeting with the maître d' here? Is that why you insisted on coming to this overpriced dump?" I couldn't help but smile at his cluelessness. "No, Leonard. I'm not having an affair. The truth is, I own this restaurant. Well, my family does." The silence that followed was deafening. Leonard's jaw dropped, while Agnes's face cycled through various shades of red and purple. "What are you talking about?" Leonard finally stammered. I took a seat, feeling more in control than I had in years. Le Jardin has belonged to my family for 3 generations. My grandparents started it as a small bistro, and my parents built it into the fine dining establishment it is today. I grew up learning every aspect of this business, from washing dishes to managing the books. Agnes found her voice, though it came out more as a squeak. But you never said anything. No, I didn't. I agreed. When I met Leonard, I was working as a waitress here, to learn the front of house operations. He assumed I was, well, just another waitress. And I let him believe it. I thought it would be romantic, letting him get to know me for who I am, not for my family's success. I paused, remembering those early days with a pang of wistful nostalgia. But then, as time went on, and I saw how Leonard treated the staff, how he treated me, I realized that revealing the truth would only make things worse. He would try to take over my family's business, or he would resent me for having something he couldn't control. Leonard's face had gone an alarming shade of white. You've been lying to me this whole time. I didn't lie. I corrected. I just omitted certain truths. The same way you omitted the fact that you were deeply in debt when we married. Or that you've been using my trust fund to finance your failing businesses for years. Agnes stood up abruptly, her chair screeching loudly against the floor. This is absurd. Leonard. We're leaving. I'm not staying here and listening to these lies. But Leonard remained seated, his eyes scanning the restaurant as if seeing it for the first time. All this time, he murmured. All those business dinners, the networking. I nodded. Yes. Leonard. All those important people you've been trying to schmooze have known who I am from the beginning. They've simply been too polite to say anything. The realization seemed to hit him like a physical blow. His carefully constructed world of superiority and control was crumbling around him. For the first time since I'd known him, Leonard looked small. Jean approached our table again, this time with 2 security guards behind him. Madame Durand, he said formally. Is everything all right here? I stood up and straightened my now stained dress. No, Jean. It's not. Mr. Durand and his mother have been behaving in a manner that is disruptive to our other guests. I believe it's time for them to leave. Leonard jumped to his feet. You can't do this to me. I'm your husband. A husband who just assaulted me in public. I reminded him calmly. Jean, please escort Mr. Durand and Mrs. Beaumont to the exit. They are no longer welcome at Le Jardin. As the security guards moved to flank Leonard and Agnes, I saw a flicker of fear in their eyes. They were accustomed to being the ones in control, the ones making the decisions. But now, in this place that had been my sanctuary long before I'd ever met them, their power was null and void. You'll regret this. Agnes spat as she was led away. Without us, you're nothing. Clara. Nothing. I watched them go, feeling a weight lift with every step they took away from me. The other diners had returned to their meals, though I could feel their curious glances and hear their whispered conversations. Once Leonard and Agnes were out of sight, I turned to Jean. I'm sorry for the disturbance, I said softly. He shook his head, a soft chuckle in his voice. No need to apologize. Madame Durand. It's good to have you back. I looked around the restaurant. The gleaming chandeliers, the impeccably set tables, the bustling kitchen visible through a glass partition. This place had been my home, my legacy, long before Leonard had entered my life. And now, it would be my fresh start. It's good to be back, I replied, meaning it with every fiber of my being. As I made my way to the private office upstairs, I could feel the eyes of the staff on me. There was respect in those gazes, and perhaps a touch of awe. For years, I had played the role of the meek, submissive wife in front of them. Now, they were seeing the real me for the first time. The office was exactly as I remembered it, warm wood paneling, plush leather chairs, and a wall of windows overlooking the glittering New York skyline. I sank into the chair behind the desk, running my fingers over the smooth surface. How many times had I sat here with my father, learning the ins and outs of the business? How many nights had I spent poring over budgets and menu plans? As the adrenaline from the confrontation began to wear off, the reality of what I had just done hit me. I had stood up to Leonard and Agnes. I had reclaimed my identity, and in doing so, I had irrevocably changed the course of my life. I picked up the phone on the desk. my fingers moving on autopilot as I dialed a familiar number. After 2 rings, a warm, maternal voice answered. "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice slightly shaky. "I need to talk to you. For the next hour." I told my mother everything, the years of emotional abuse, the financial manipulation, and finally, the events of that night. She listened without interrupting, offering soft sounds of support whenever my voice faltered. "Oh, honey," she said when I was finished. "I'm so proud of you. We've been worried for a long time, but we didn't want to pressure you." "I know," I replied, wiping away a stray tear. "I'm sorry I shut you out. I thought I could handle it on my own." "You're not alone anymore," my mother assured me. "We're here for you. Whatever you need." When I hung up the phone, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I had spent years dimming my own light to make Leonard shine. Now, it was time to reclaim my brilliance. I pulled out a notepad and began making lists, things to do, people to call, changes to implement. By the time the last diners had left the restaurant and the staff had finished cleaning, I had a plan. Tomorrow, I would call my lawyer and begin the divorce proceedings. I would meet with the restaurant's management team and take a more active role in running the business. I would reconnect with old friends and colleagues I had pushed away at Leonard's insistence. But tonight, I would savor this moment of freedom. I walked over to the windows and gazed out at the city I loved. New York had always been a place of reinvention, of second chances. Now, it was my turn. As I stood there, I realized the woman reflected in the mirror was someone I had almost forgotten. Strong, capable, and unafraid. She had been there all along, waiting for the opportunity to emerge. Leonard had thrown a $50,000 meal in my face, thinking he was ruining me. Instead, he had set me free. And that, I realized with a smile, was priceless. I took a deep breath and leaned against the cool glass of the window. The New York skyline shimmered back at me, a million points of light in the darkness. It was time to face the music. And by music, I meant the fallout from the scene I had just caused in my own restaurant. As I descended the stairs, I could hear the murmur of conversations from the remaining diners. Clearly, word had spread about what had happened, and I could feel curious eyes following me as I walked through the dining room. Some glances were sympathetic, others intrigued, but none conveyed the judgment I had feared. Gene met me at the bottom of the stairs, his normally impassive face creased with concern. "Madame Durand," he said softly, "Mr. Durand and Mrs. Beaumont are still outside. They are causing quite a commotion." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. Of course they were. Leonard and Agnes had never been ones to go quietly into the night. What kind of commotion? Gene hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "They are threatening to call the police, claiming they have been illegally ejected from the premises. Mr. Durand is being quite explicit about his displeasure." I could picture Leonard out there, red-faced and shouting, while Agnes dramatically fanned herself and bemoaned the injustice of it all. It would have been almost comical if it weren't so pathetic. "All right," I said, squaring my shoulders. "I'll handle this." As I approached the main entrance, I could hear Leonard's voice booming through the heavy oak doors. "Do you know who I am?" he was yelling. "I'll have this place shut down. I'll sue each and every one of you." I flung the doors open and stepped out into the cool night air. Leonard and Agnes spun around to face me, their expressions a mixture of fury and disbelief. "You," Agnes spat, jabbing a jeweled finger in my direction. "How dare you humiliate us like this?" I met her gaze steadily. "I think you accomplished that quite well on your own." "Agnes." Leonard stepped forward, his face contorted with rage. "This isn't over. Clara. You can't just throw me away like yesterday's trash. I'm your husband. A husband who just assaulted me in front of a restaurant full of witnesses." I reminded him calmly. "I think you'll find I can do exactly what I've done." He lunged forward and grabbed my arm. "You little," before he could finish the sentence. 2 large hands clamped down on his shoulders, pulling him away. I looked up and saw Marco and David, our head of security and his deputy, flanking Leonard. "Is there a problem here, Madame Durand?" Marco asked, his deep voice rumbling with barely contained anger. I shook my head, rubbing my arm where Leonard had grabbed me. "No problem, Marco. Mr. Durand was just leaving." Leonard struggled against Marco's grip. "Get your hands off me. You overgrown gorilla. Do you know who I am?" David, ever the more diplomatic of the two, interjected. "Sir, we're going to have to ask you to leave the premises. If you continue to cause a disturbance, we'll have no choice but to call the police." Agnes let out a dramatic gasp. "The police? But we're the victims here. This woman," she jabbed a finger in my direction, "has stolen my son's money and now she's trying to ruin his reputation." I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Stolen his money? Agnes, every penny Leonard has spent in the last 5 years has come from my family's business, the business he didn't even know existed until tonight. Leonard's face paled at my words. I could see the wheels turning in his head as he realized just how precarious his position was. "Clara," he said, his voice suddenly soft and wheedling. "Honey, let's not do anything rash. We can talk about this like adults." I felt a wave of disgust wash over me. How many times had I fallen for this act? How many times had I let him coax me into forgetting his cruelty, his manipulation? "No, Leonard," I said firmly. "We're done talking. We're done. Period." I turned to Marco and David. "Please make sure Mr. Durand and Mrs. Beaumont leave the premises. They are not to be allowed back into the restaurant under any circumstances." Marco nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "With pleasure, Madame Durand." As they began to lead Leonard and Agnes away, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned and saw Jean standing beside me, an expression of quiet pride on his face. "You did well, Clara," he said softly, using my first name for the first time in years. "Your parents would be proud." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "Thank you, Jean, for everything." We stood there in silence, watching as Marco and David escorted Leonard and Agnes to the curb. Leonard was still protesting, but his voice had lost its confident edge. Agnes, on the other hand, had gone surprisingly quiet, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route. As they reached the street, a taxi conveniently pulled up. Marco opened the door, his expression making it clear that this was not a suggestion. With one last glare in my direction, Leonard climbed into the cab, followed by a subdued Agnes. As the taxi pulled away, I felt a tremendous weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't over. I knew there would be legal battles ahead, not to mention the emotional fallout, but for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I walked back into the restaurant and gazed at the elegant facade and the warm glow spilling from the windows. This place had been my refuge, my heritage, and now, it would be my fresh start. "Jean," I said, "I think it's time we closed up for the night. And tomorrow, well, tomorrow we have some changes to discuss." He nodded, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "Of course, Madame Durand. Shall I inform the staff?" I smiled, feeling a surge of affection for this man who had been more of a father figure to me in recent years than my own father had been for so many. "Please. And tell them things are going to be different from now on. Better." As Jean went back inside to initiate closing procedures, I took a moment to myself on the steps of Le Jardin. The night air was cool against my skin and carried the faint aromas of the city, car exhaust, street food, and the indefinable energy of New York after dark. I thought about the scene that had just unfolded, the years of pent-up anger and resentment that had finally boiled over. A part of me felt guilty for causing such a spectacle in my family's restaurant, but a larger part, a part that was growing stronger with every minute, felt euphoric. For so long, I had played the role of the perfect wife, quiet, supportive, always in the background. I had dimmed my own light so that Leonard's could shine brighter. But now, standing on the threshold of my own domain, I realized how much I had sacrificed in the name of keeping the peace. Never again, I promised myself. Never again would I let someone else dictate my worth, my actions, my being. As I turned to go back inside, I caught my reflection in the polished brass of the door handle. The woman staring back at me was someone I barely recognized, strong, confident, with a fire in her eyes that I thought had been extinguished long ago. I smiled at my reflection, feeling a surge of pride. This was who I was meant to be. This was the woman I had buried beneath years of compromise and self-doubt. And now, finally, I was free. Inside, The last few guests were gathering their things, casting curious glances in my direction as they departed. The staff moved efficiently, clearing tables and closing down the kitchen. But there was an underlying current of excitement, of anticipation. I walked through the dining room, stopping to speak with each member of the staff. I thanked them for their discretion and professionalism during the evening's drama, assuring them that their jobs were secure. Then, I gathered the remaining staff in the main dining area. Standing there, surrounded by the people who had kept my family's legacy alive even when I had withdrawn from it, I felt a sense of coming home. "Thank you all for your hard work tonight," I began, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling within me. "I know tonight didn't go exactly as planned, and I appreciate your adaptability and professionalism." I paused, looking out at the familiar faces. Some I had known for years, others were more recent additions to the Lajardin family. All of them had witnessed my gradual retreat from the business, and all of them had continued to treat me with respect, despite Leonard's often boorish behavior. "As you may have gathered, things are going to be changing around here," I continued. "I want you all to know that these changes will be for the better. Lajardin has always been more than just a restaurant, it's been a family, my family. And I've been absent from that family for far too long." I saw nods of agreement and smiles appearing on tired faces. Jean, standing at the back of the group, gave me an encouraging nod. "Starting tomorrow, I'll be taking a much more active role in the day-to-day operations of Lajardin. I know I have a lot of catching up to do, and I'll be relying on all of you to help me get back up to speed. But I promise you this, Lajardin will not only continue to be the finest restaurant in New York, it will become a model for how a business should treat its employees and its community." When I finished speaking, a spontaneous round of applause erupted. I felt my cheeks flush with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. This was my team, my people. And together, we were going to write the next chapter in Lajardin's story. As the staff began to disperse, each stopping to offer a word of support or a pat on the back, I felt a sense of purpose that had been missing from my life for far too long. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. I had no illusions about that. But for the first time in years, I was looking forward to the challenge. Lajardin had always been my sanctuary. Now, it would be my battleground. The place where I would reclaim my life, my identity, and my future. And I was ready for the fight. The next morning, I woke up in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house. After the drama at Lajardin, I couldn't bear the thought of returning to the penthouse I shared with Leonard. My mom had insisted I stay with them, and for once, I didn't argue. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling I had gazed at countless times as a teenager, memories began to flood in, not just of my youth, but of the years with Leonard, years marked by manipulation and emotional abuse that I had somehow normalized over time. I remembered our first date. How charming Leonard had been. He had swept me off my feet with his confidence and ambition. I was young, fresh out of college, and eager to prove myself outside of my family's business. Leonard had seemed like the perfect partner, someone who would support my dreams and push me to be my best. How quickly that dream had soured. It started subtly, comments about my clothes, suggestions that I change my hair or makeup. "I just want you to look your best, honey," he'd say, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. Then came the criticisms of my friends, my hobbies, my work. Slowly but surely, Leonard had eroded my self-esteem, molding me into the quiet, docile wife he wanted. And then there was Agnes. From the moment I met her, Leonard's mother made it clear that she didn't think I was good enough for her son. She criticized everything from my table manners to my education, always with a saccharine smile and a "I'm just trying to help you fit in" between the two of them. They had managed to erode my confidence to the point where I barely recognized myself. I had relinquished my active role in the family business, letting Leonard take credit for my ideas and connections. I had distanced myself from friends and family, isolating myself in a world where Leonard and Agnes's opinions were the only ones that mattered. A knock on the door pulled me from my reverie. "Clara," my mom's voice called softly. "Are you awake? Honey, come in." "Mom," I replied, sitting up and running a hand through my tangled hair. She entered carrying a tray laden with breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and a steaming mug of coffee. The sight and smell brought back memories of countless mornings before school. where my mom always insisted that a good breakfast was the key to a good day. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, placing the tray on my lap before sitting on the edge of the bed. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of concern and relief. "How are you feeling?" I took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth spread through me. "Honestly, I'm not sure. It's like I've been asleep for years and I'm just now waking up." Mom nodded and reached out to squeeze my hand. "I know. Honey. We've been so worried about you. Your father and we could see what was happening. But we didn't know how to help you without pushing you further away." Guilt washed over me as I realized how my withdrawal must have affected my parents. "I'm sorry, Mom. I never meant to shut you out. I just thought I could handle it. I thought if I just tried harder, was better somehow, things would get better." "Oh, Clara." Mom sighed, pulling me into a hug. "None of this is your fault, Leonard. And that witch of a mother of his, they're the ones who should be sorry." I let myself be held, feeling like a small child again. For so long, I had tried to be strong, to keep up appearances. It felt good to let go, to be vulnerable with someone I knew truly cared about my best interests. As I pulled away, wiping at the tears I hadn't realized I'd shed, a new sense of resolve washed over me. "I'm going to file for divorce," I said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating as they left my mouth. Mom nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I think that's for the best, honey. And you should know, your father and I are behind you 100%. Anything you need, legal help, financial support, or just someone to talk to, we're here." I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. "Thank you, Mom. I don't know what I would do without you." After finishing my breakfast and taking a long, hot shower, I felt ready to face the day. I borrowed some of my old clothes that were still in my closet, a simple blouse and slacks that felt more like me than anything I'd worn in years. Downstairs, I found my dad in his study, looking over some papers. He looked up as I entered, a warm smile spreading across his face. "There's my girl," he said, rising to engulf me in a bear hug. "Hi, Dad," I murmured. It had been too long. As we separated, Dad held me at arm's length, his eyes searching my face. "You know, I always hoped you'd come back to us. I just wish it hadn't taken, well, all of this." I nodded, understanding the years of unspoken worry behind his words. "I know, Dad. I'm sorry I let things get so out of control." He shook his head firmly. "No apologies necessary, Clara. What matters is you're here now, and you're taking back control of your life." He paused, then said, his tone switching to one I recognized from countless business meetings. "Now, let's talk strategy." For the next few hours, Dad and I discussed the steps I needed to take. He recommended a top-tier divorce lawyer, someone who had helped other high-profile clients navigate complex separations. We talked about the restaurant, about my plans to take a more active role in its management. Despite everything, I felt a growing sense of excitement. For the first time in years, I was making decisions for myself, charting my own course. When lunchtime rolled around, Mom insisted we all have "let's take a break." We gathered in the kitchen, making sandwiches and laughing over old family stories. It felt good to smile, to laugh without worrying about Leonard's disapproval or Agnes's sarcastic remarks. After lunch, I knew it was time to make the call I had been both dreading and anticipating. I retreated to the guest room for privacy, my heart pounding as I dialed the number of the lawyer Dad had recommended. "Samantha Reeves' office. How can I help you?" a crisp voice answered. "Hello. This is Clara Durand. I'd like to make an appointment with Ms. Reeves regarding a divorce proceeding." The words felt surreal as they left my mouth, but also profoundly right. This was the first step toward reclaiming my life, toward becoming the woman I was always meant to be. As I set the appointment for the following day, I felt a mixture of emotions swirling within me. Fear, certainly. I knew Leonard wouldn't let me go without a fight. But also hope, excitement, and a burgeoning sense of my own strength. I spent the rest of the afternoon looking through old photo albums with my mother, reminiscing about happier times and dreaming about the future. As evening fell, we all gathered in the living room. Dad opened a bottle of champagne, pouring each of us a glass. "To new beginnings," he toasted, raising his glass. "And to family," I added, clinking my glass against his. As I sipped the bubbly drink, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I knew I wasn't walking it alone. I had my family, my real family, behind me every step of the way. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind drifted to Le Jardin. I thought about the staff, about Jean and Marco, and everyone else who had witnessed my transformation. I made a mental note to call Jean in the morning to start laying out plans for the restaurant's future, our future. For the first time in years, I fell asleep with a smile on my face, eager to see what the new day would bring. The Clara who had allowed herself to be diminished, who had shrunk herself to fit the mold Leonard and Agnes had created, was gone. In her place was a woman ready to stand tall, shine brightly, and take on whatever challenges lay ahead. As I drifted off, I promised myself, no matter what happened with the divorce, no matter how hard Leonard and Agnes might try to fight me, I would never again let anyone make me feel small. I was Clara Durand, daughter of restaurateurs, entrepreneurs, and survivors, and I was ready to write the next chapter of my story, on my own terms. 2 days after my meeting with Samantha Reeves, the divorce lawyer, I was back at Le Jardin, immersed in the day-to-day operations of the restaurant. It felt good to be back, to be doing something productive with my hands and mind. The staff had welcomed me back with open arms, and I was slowly but surely finding my footing in the business world again. I was in the middle of a meeting with our head chef, discussing potential menu updates, when Jean knocked on the office door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Madame Durand," he said, his face apologetic. "But Mr. Durand is here. He's rather insistent on speaking with you." I felt my stomach drop, but I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I knew this confrontation was coming. "Thank you. Jean, could you show him in?" As Jean went to retrieve Leonard, I turned to Chef Michel. "I'm so sorry, but we'll have to continue this later. Could you give us some privacy?" Michel nodded, his kind eyes filled with understanding. "Of course. Clara, take all the time you need." When he was gone, I stood up, smoothing my blouse and taking another deep breath. I could do this. I was stronger now, more sure of myself. Leonard couldn't intimidate me anymore. The door opened, and Leonard stormed in, his face red with rage. He was clutching a stack of documents, which I recognized as the divorce papers my lawyer had sent. "What the hell is this, Clara?" he snarled, waving the papers in my face. "Is this some kind of joke?" I held his gaze steadily. "It's not a joke, Leonard. I'm filing for divorce." He laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound. "Divorce? You can't. You're nothing without me, Clara. Nothing." I felt a flicker of my old fear, but I pushed it down. "That's where you're wrong, Leonard. I was someone long before I met you, and I'll continue to be someone long after you're gone from my life." He slammed the papers down on my desk, leaning close. I could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You think you can just throw away everything we've built? Everything I've done for you?" I raised an eyebrow. "Everything you've done for me? You mean belittling me at every turn? Isolating me from my friends and family? Spending my money like it was water?" Leonard's face twisted with rage. "Your money? Don't make me laugh. Every penny we have is because of my hard work. My connections." I couldn't help but laugh. "Oh, Leonard. Your connections? You mean the connections I introduced you to through my family's business? The business you didn't even know existed until a few days ago?" He faltered for a moment, taken aback by my bluntness. But he quickly recovered. "You're a nasty little shrew. After everything I've put up with your insecurities, your pathetic attempts at a career, this is how you repay me." I felt a surge of anger at his words, but I kept my voice calm. "Put up with me, Leonard. You created those insecurities. You undermined every attempt I made at independence. But not anymore." He scoffed. "And what are you going to do? Run this little restaurant by yourself? You'll be begging me to come back within a month." I laughed, feeling a sense of power I hadn't experienced in years. "This little restaurant has been in my family for generations, Leonard. It was successful long before you came along, and it will continue to be successful long after you're gone." Leonard's face paled as the reality of the situation seemed to finally sink in. "You can't do this to me, Clara. Think about what people will say. Think about my reputation. I shook my head. I'm done thinking about your reputation, Leonard. For once. I'm thinking about myself. About what I want. What I need. He lunged forward again, grabbing my arm. You listen to me. You little. Before he could finish, the door burst open. Marco, our head of security, rushed in, followed closely by Jean. Everything all right, Madame Durand? Marco asked, his eyes fixed on Leonard's hand gripping my arm. I gently but firmly removed Leonard's hand. Everything's fine. Marco. Mr. Durand was just leaving. Leonard looked at me, at Marco, then back at me again. The fight seemed to drain out of him all at once. This isn't over. Clara, he muttered. Yes, it is. I replied firmly. Goodbye, Leonard. As Marco escorted Leonard out, I sank back into my chair, feeling drained but strangely exhilarated. Jean lingered by the door, concern etched on his face. Are you all right, Clara? He asked softly. I nodded, managing a small smile. I'm fine, Jean. Better than fine. Actually, I feel free. Jean let out a breath, relief evident in his eyes. I'm glad to hear it. You know, we're all behind you, Clara. All the staff. We've seen how he treated you over the years. And, well, we're happy to have the real you back. His words warmed my heart. Thank you, Jean. That means more to me than you know. After Jean left, I sat at my desk, gazing out at the New York skyline. The confrontation with Leonard had been unpleasant, but it had also been necessary. For the first time, I had stood my ground. I had refused to be intimidated by his anger and manipulation. I thought about the journey that had led me to this point, the years of slowly losing myself, of dimming my own light to make Leonard shine brighter, the constant criticism from Agnes, chipping away at my self-worth, bit by bit, the isolation from my family and friends, until Leonard and Agnes were the only voices I could hear. But I also thought about the strength I had found within myself in the past few days, the support of my parents, the loyalty of the Le Jardin staff, the guidance of Samantha Reeves. I wasn't alone in this fight. I had people in my corner, people who believed in me and wanted to see me succeed. I picked up the phone, dialing Samantha's number. When her assistant put me through, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Leonard was here, I said. He's seen the divorce papers. I could almost hear Samantha's nod over the phone. I expected as much. How did it go? I recounted the confrontation, sparing no details. When I was finished, Samantha was quiet for a moment. Clara, she said finally, I want you to know how proud I am of you. Standing up to an abuser is never easy, but you did it with grace and strength. Her words brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, Samantha. I couldn't have done it without your help. You're stronger than you know. Clara, she replied. Now, given Leonard's reaction, I think we need to be prepared for him to push back hard on the divorce. Are you ready for that? I took a deep breath, considering her words. Was I ready for a protracted legal battle? For Leonard to drag my name through the mud? To try to take everything I had? Yes, I said finally. I'm ready. Whatever it takes. I'm not going back to that life. Good, Samantha said. And I could hear the smile in her voice. Then let's get to work. Over the next few hours, Samantha and I went over our strategy. We discussed financial records, witness statements, evidence of Leonard's emotional abuse. It was draining, having to relive some of the worst moments of my marriage. But it was also cathartic. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of my old life. Another step toward freedom. When we were finished, it was late. The restaurant below was in full swing. The sounds of clinking glasses and lively conversation drifting up to my office. I stood up, stretching the kinks out of my back, and headed downstairs. The dining room was a sea of elegantly dressed patrons, the air filled with the aroma of exquisite cuisine. As I walked through, I caught snippets of conversation, saw faces lit with enjoyment. This was what Le Jardin was about, not just fine dining, but an experience. A moment of joy amidst busy lives. I made my way to the kitchen, where Chef Michel and his team were in full flow, a well-oiled machine churning out perfect dish after perfect dish. Michel looked up as I entered, a question in his eyes. Everything all right, Clara? He asked, expertly flipping a delicate soufflé as he spoke. I smiled, feeling a sense of belonging I hadn't experienced in years. Everything is great, Michelle. In fact, I was wondering if you had some time to continue our conversation from earlier. I have a few ideas I'd like to run by you. Michelle's face lit up. For you, Clara, always. Let me just finish this service. And I'm all yours. As I waited for Michelle, I leaned against the wall, taking in the controlled chaos of the kitchen. This was my world, I realized. Not the glittering parties and fake smiles of Leonard's social circle, but this, the heat, the pressure, and the camaraderie of a top-tier restaurant kitchen. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt truly excited about the future. There would be challenges ahead. I knew. The divorce would be messy, and rebuilding my life would take time and effort. But standing there, in the heart of Le Jardin, I knew I was up for the challenge. I was Clara Durand, restaurateur, entrepreneur, survivor, and I was ready to rise from the ashes of my old life, stronger and more determined than ever. The months flew by in a whirlwind of legal battles, business decisions, and personal growth. The divorce proceedings were as messy as Samantha had predicted, with Leonard fighting tooth and nail for every penny. But with each passing day, I felt stronger, more capable of standing up for myself. It was a crisp autumn morning when I received the call from Samantha. I was in the middle of a staff meeting at Le Jardin, discussing our plans for the upcoming holiday season, when my phone buzzed insistently in my pocket. "Excuse me," I said to the team, stepping out of the room. "Samantha, what's the news?" Her voice was warm and triumphant. "It's over, Clara. The judge has signed the divorce settlement. You're officially free." I leaned against the wall, my legs suddenly weak. "Seriously? It's done? It's done," Samantha confirmed. "And Clara, we won. Full ownership of Le Jardin remains with you, as do your family's other business interests." Leonard walks away with a generous settlement, but it's nowhere near what he was demanding. I felt tears prick at my eyes. "Thank you, Samantha, for everything. You did all the hard work. Clara, I just helped guide you through the legal labyrinth. Now go celebrate. You've earned it." As I hung up the phone, I took a moment to compose myself. The last few months had been a rollercoaster of emotions: fear, anger, determination. And now, finally, relief. I was free. Truly, completely free. I returned to the meeting room, where my team was waiting patiently. Jean, ever perceptive, noticed the change in my demeanor immediately. "Everything all right, Clara?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. I looked around the room, at the faces of the people who had supported me through this challenging time. Chef Michel, who had worked tirelessly with me to revamp our menu. Marco, who had ensured my safety when Leonard's behavior became erratic. The servers, the kitchen staff, the cleaners, they had all rallied around me, supporting me in ways big and small. "Everything is wonderful," I said, a smile breaking across my face. "The divorce is final. Le Jardin is officially, unequivocally, ours." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Before I knew it, I was enveloped in hugs, handshakes, and words of congratulations. The joy in the room was palpable, a testament to how much this place, these people, meant to me. When the excitement died down, Chef Michel cleared his throat. "I believe this calls for a celebration." "No, perhaps a special menu tonight. On the house." "Absolutely." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Michel. Let's close the restaurant to the public tonight and have a party for the staff and their families. We'll celebrate not just my divorce, but all of us. This incredible team we've built." The idea was met with enthusiasm, and soon everyone was buzzing with plans. As the team dispersed to begin preparations, Jean lingered behind. "Clara," he said softly, "I hope you know how proud we all are of you. The way you've handled everything, the changes you've made here at Le Jardin, it's been inspiring to watch." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Thank you, Jean. I couldn't have done any of it without all of you." He smiled, patting my shoulder gently. You're your parents' daughter. Through and through. They would be so proud to see you now. When Jean left to help with the party preparations, I retreated to my office. I needed a moment to process everything, to let the reality of my new situation sink in. I walked over to the window, gazing out at the New York skyline. The city stretched out before me, a tapestry of possibilities. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt truly excited about the future. My phone buzzed again, a text message from my mom. Heard the news. So proud of you. Honey. Dad and I will be there tonight to celebrate. Love you. I smiled, typing back a quick reply. My relationship with my parents had been rekindled over the past few months. Stronger than ever. They had been my rock throughout the divorce proceedings, offering support, advice, and a shoulder to cry on when things got tough. As I set down my phone, my eyes fell on a framed photo on my desk. It was a picture from years ago, taken the day I officially joined the family business. I was standing between my parents, outside of Le Jardin, all of us radiating pride and excitement. I picked up the frame, running my finger over the image. That young woman in the photo had been so full of dreams and ambition. Somewhere along the way, in the years with Leonard, I had lost sight of her. But now, I realized, I had found her again. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. By evening, Le Jardin had been transformed. The usual elegant dining room had given way to a more relaxed, festive atmosphere. Tables were pushed together to create long, family-style seating. The bar was stocked with champagne, and the kitchen was producing a steady stream of delicious aromas. As our staff and their families began to arrive, I felt a sense of community that had been missing from my life for too long. Children ran around, playing hide-and-seek among the tables. Couples danced to the soft jazz playing over the speakers. Laughter and conversation filled the air. My parents arrived, immediately engulfing me in a warm hug. We're so proud of you, Clara, my dad said, his voice thick with emotion. You've shown so much strength and grace, my mom added, squeezing my hand. And look what you've done with Le Jardin. It's better than ever. As we made our way through the crowd, I was struck by how many people stopped to offer their congratulations, not just on the divorce, but on the changes I had implemented at the restaurant. We had expanded our community outreach, started a mentorship program for aspiring chefs from disadvantaged backgrounds, and revamped our menu to include more sustainable, locally sourced options. Midway through the evening, Jean clinked his glass, calling for attention. If I could have everyone's attention for a moment, he said, his voice carrying over the din, I'd like to propose a toast to our fearless leader, Clara Durand. All eyes turned to me, and I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. Clara, Jean continued, you have shown us all what it means to be resilient, to face adversity head-on, and to emerge stronger. Under your leadership, Le Jardin has not only survived, but thrived. You have created more than just a restaurant, you've created a family. To Clara, the room echoed, raising their glasses. As I looked around at the smiling faces, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was what I had been missing during those years with Leonard. Genuine connections. A sense of purpose. The joy of building something meaningful. The party continued late into the night. As it wound down, I found myself back at the window in my office, looking out at the city lights. The door opened softly behind me, and I turned to see Chef Michel. Quite a night. Hey, he said, coming to stand beside me. It was perfect, I replied, smiling. Thank you for everything, Michel. He waved away my thanks. It is we who should be thanking you, Clara. You've breathed new life into this place, into all of us. We stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the city below. Then Michel said, finally, what's next for Clara Durand? I chuckled. You know, for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to find out. We have that new farm-to-table initiative to launch. The charity gala next month, Michel laughed. Always working. Hey, but I meant for you. Personally, you're free now. The world is your oyster, as they say. I considered his question. What did I want now that I was free? I want to travel, I said slowly, the idea taking shape as I spoke. Not for too long. I could never be away from Le Jardin for too long. But I want to explore. To learn about cuisines and cultures I've never experienced. I want to bring those experiences back here. To make Le Jardin not just the best restaurant in New York, but a place that celebrates the diversity of global cuisine. Michel nodded approvingly. I think that sounds wonderful, Clara. And I know we'll all be here, ready to help bring your visions to life when you return. When Michel left, I turned back to the window, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. The journey to this point had been difficult, filled with heartache and struggle. But standing here now, I wouldn't change a thing. Every challenge had shaped me, made me stronger, brought me closer to the woman I was always meant to be. I was Clara Durand, daughter, friend, entrepreneur, survivor. And my story was just beginning. As I left my office and rejoined the last of the partygoers, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The symphony of my life, which for so long had been discordant and painful, had finally found its harmony, and the music, I knew, would only get sweeter from here on out.